Think about the stagecoach drivers of the Wild West, often nameless in tales and movies, usually the first to catch a bullet in a shootout. But let me tell you, these unsung heroes of the frontier were as bold and sturdy as they come. Their job might not seem as perilous as being a cowboy, gambler, soldier, or lawman, but driving a stagecoach required nerves of steel and a grip as firm as iron. These men, known by nicknames like Whip, Charlie, Jehu, and Reinsman, were the daredevils of their time, akin to the Roman chariot racers of old. Hold it right there, partner. Danger awaits those who don't click that subscribe button. Subscribe for survival in the untamed Wild West. From the earliest days of stagecoaching, they carved their legacy on the dusty trails of the West, facing down dangers with a crack of their whips and a steady hand on the reins. Long before the iron horse, that's trains, for the uninitiated crisscrossed America, stagecoaches were the kings of the frontier roads, connecting distant towns and carrying tales from one end of the country to the other. In the mid-1800s, as the nation expanded westward, there was a burning need for reliable transportation and communication across the vast, untamed territories. Enter the stagecoach, a sturdy four-wheeled vehicle pulled by teams of horses, tough enough to handle the rough trails and unpredictable weather of the Wild West. These coaches were more than just a means to get from point A to B. They were moving hubs of news, mail, and human stories. From the Butterfield Overland Mail Route that stretched a whopping 2,800 miles from Missouri to California to shorter routes linking boomtowns and remote settlements, stagecoaches stitched together the American frontier. Drivers with reins in hand would lead their horses and passengers over rocky paths, through dense forests, and across unforgiving deserts. Routes like the famous Pony Express, though short-lived, covered around 1,900 miles and were essential in keeping the East and West connected. Stagecoaches traversed these long distances, stopping at stations along the way for rest, resupply, and to switch out weary horses for fresh ones. The significance of these stagecoaches can't be overstated. They brought people, miners, businessmen, families into new lands, helping to settle and develop the West. Important documents, contracts, and letters traveled in the locked boxes of these coaches, bridging the gap between isolated communities and the rapidly modernizing world. Traveling by stagecoach wasn't no leisurely carriage ride. It was a venture fraught with danger and discomfort, but one that connected the vast expanses of the American frontier. The paths these coaches traveled were nothing short of treacherous. Roads were often just rocky trails full of ruts and hazards, making the journey bone-jarring and risky. Bandits lurked like hungry coyotes, seeing stagecoaches and their passengers as easy pickings. Add to that the threat of tipping over on these rough roads, and you've got yourself a ride that required both guts and faith. Comfort was a foreign concept in stagecoach travel. Passengers, packed like sardines, often found themselves sitting shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, trying to catch a wink of sleep while sitting upright. The famed Concord stagecoaches, built by J.S. Abbott and Lewis Downing, were like baskets on leather straps, rocking and rolling along the trail. Despite their craftsmanship, these coaches offered little in the way of comfort, especially when crammed full with up to 12 passengers. The stagecoach driver, or jehu, was a figure of authority and skill. Holding 3 pairs of reins in one hand and a whip in the other, the jehu was akin to a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of horse and coach. He was responsible not just for keeping to the schedule, but also for navigating dangerous roads and soothing his team of horses through every kind of predicament the wild land threw at him. One of the biggest names in the stagecoach business was Ben Holliday, owner of the Overland Mail Express Company. His operation was no small venture, employing over 15,000 folks and running a fleet of 110 Concord stagecoaches across 3,000 miles. Holliday's drivers were a cut above, decked out in velvet-trimmed uniforms, and paid handsomely for their trouble. In the rugged world of the Wild West, a stagecoach driver's day was as much about battling the elements and dangers of the frontier as it was about transporting passengers and parcels. Let's take a closer look at the sun-up to sundown challenges a jehu faced on those dusty trails. From the crack of dawn, our jehu was up against the merciless whims of Mother Nature, scorching heat, biting cold, howling winds, or sudden downpours. The weather on the frontier was as unpredictable as a wild stallion. Driving through these extremes, the jehu had to be tough as leather, with every fiber of his being focused on protecting his passengers, his horses, and himself. The trails were no Sunday carriage ride. They were full of perils, rocky paths, steep inclines, narrow passes, and sometimes swollen rivers crossing their way. Every jolt and jostle of the coach tested the jehu's endurance and skill, demanding constant vigilance and a firm hand on the reins. Bandits and highwaymen saw stagecoaches as rolling treasures ripe for the taking. And then there were the risks of Native American attacks, particularly in more remote areas. The jehu had to be prepared for anything, from a sudden ambush to a stealthy approach, keeping his passengers safe while guarding the valuables aboard. The toll on the jehu's body was nothing short of grueling. Hours upon hours sitting atop the coach, keeping a tight grip on the reins, the relentless bouncing and jostling. It all added up. Fatigue was a constant companion, yet he couldn't let his guard down for a moment. Quick reflexes, sharp eyes, and an iron will were his best allies against the unexpected. Let me tell y'all about the rough and tumble days of a stagecoach driver, especially during them gold rush years in the Rocky Mountains. Wells Fargo, a big name in the stagecoach line, had its hands full protecting its passengers and shiny cargo from the likes of bandits and outlaws. Them Rocky Mountains were crawling with robbers eyeing Wells Fargo's coaches, hoping to make a quick score off the gold and valuables being carted across. Wells Fargo weren't no slouch, though. They bolted safes right to the coach floors and hired tough gun-toting guards to ride along. But bless my soul, them stagecoaches still found themselves staring down the barrel of a bandit's gun. Now, Wells Fargo weren't just about brute force. They had some tricks up their sleeve, too. They taught them silver shippers how to melt their precious metals into bars too dang heavy for any thief in a hurry. But even with all that, the robberies kept coming as persistent as a coyote after a rabbit. So what did Wells Fargo do? They went and started their own detective agency, paying top dollar for the sharpest eyes in the West. Sure, it cost them as much as they were losing to robberies, but there's something to be said for serving up justice to notorious outlaws like John Sontag and Black Bart. For our jehu, that's the stagecoach driver. Each day was a high-stakes game. From sunup to sundown, he had to keep his eyes peeled for trouble, ready to holler at the first sign of danger. It wasn't just about managing them horses, it was about keeping a level head when danger reared its ugly head. Come nightfall, pulling into the station was more than just the end of a journey, it was a victory. That jehu with sweat on his brow and dust in his boots had done more than just drive a stagecoach. He'd kept the wheels of progress turning in the wild, wild west. Now let's yarn a bit about the folks our stagecoach drivers rubbed elbows with and how they unwound after a long haul across the Wild West. Stagecoach drivers, or jehus as they were known, weren't just skilled reinsmen. They were also the day's storytellers and news bringers. On them long rides, they'd often strike up conversations with passengers, swapping tales and news, making the long journey a mite more bearable. They'd hear stories from back east, share the latest gossip from the last town, and sometimes just lend an ear to a weary traveler. When the stagecoach rolled into a new town, the jehu was often greeted like a celebrity. He brought news from afar, something folks were always hankering for. In them days, news was as precious as gold dust. The jehu might spend a spell chatting with the local blacksmith, the saloon keeper, or just the regular townsfolk passing along stories and catching up on local happenings. Now, driving a stagecoach was bone-tiring work, so when a jehu got himself some downtime, he made the most of it. Some jehus might find themselves in the local saloon, enjoying a whiskey and maybe a friendly game of cards or dice. Others might just kick back and enjoy a quiet moment whittling a piece of wood or just taking in the sights and sounds of the town. If the layover was long enough, a jehu might partake in whatever local festivities were happening. This could be anything from a dance at the town hall, a horse race, or just a big communal meal. These events were a chance for the jehu to feel part of a community, even if just for a short while. And let's not forget the simple pleasure of rest. After spending hours on the box, navigating treacherous trails and keeping alert for danger, sometimes the best form of relaxation was just a solid night's sleep in a real bed, if he was lucky enough to find one. In the bustling era of the Wild West, being a stagecoach driver was more than just a job. It was a way of life, with its own set of economic realities and personal sacrifices. Stagecoach drivers, or jehus, earned a fair wage, considering the risks and demands of the job. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep them fed and clothed, with a little extra for life's pleasures. These hardy souls often found themselves spending their earnings in the towns they passed through, a hot meal at a local eatery, a night's stay at an inn, or perhaps a round of drinks at the saloon. Now some jehus were savers, stashing away their earnings with dreams of a different life, maybe buying a plot of land, starting a business, or just settling down away from the relentless pace of the road. But saving was tough with the temptations of town life and the need to constantly repair or replace gear and clothing worn out by the rigors of the trail. Being a stagecoach driver meant a life on the move. These men were always heading to the next town, the next stop, making it hard to put down roots. Relationships were often fleeting, friends made on the road, brief romances, acquaintances in towns along the route. It was a life that valued independence and resilience, but it could also be a lonesome one. This transient lifestyle had its impact on personal relationships. Long periods away from home meant missed connections and strained ties with loved ones. And for those jehus with families, it was a constant juggle between earning a living and being present in their kin's lives. Many a driver dreamed of a time when he could hang up his whip for good and settle down. But for most, the road was both a livelihood and a home. These unsung heroes with reins in hand and dust in their wake did more than just ferry folks from here to yonder. They stitched together the fabric of the American frontier, one rugged mile at a time. Them stagecoach drivers, they were the early road warriors, the architects of the transportation paths that crisscrossed the untamed landscapes. Their routes became the backbone of trade and communication, connecting lonesome towns to the bustling heart of America. They carried with them not just mail and passengers, but the stories, news, and dreams that helped knit together far-flung communities. Now let's sit a spell and ponder a question. Can you imagine what it'd be like sitting atop that stagecoach, reins in hand, the open road ahead? What part of that wild, roving life calls out to you?